a pretty substantial edge in this matchup. That said, the die roll is still critical, and Boros does have a lot of good tools. If Jacob has to lean on Supreme Verdict or some of his slower draws, Lundquist can still get it done, but this is going to be much more challenging for Ben Lundquist than playing against Esper.
One of the things I was actually interested in to see who was going to be playing first in this game, as Last Breath is going to take care of Soldier of the Pantheon right now, so there can be no Brave the Element shenanigans. But I think deciding who wins the die roll is actually pretty important, especially for Game 1, and clearly it was Wilson, and I think that's going to play a huge role here. Temple of Triumph. Little scry action here. You see Ben's hand. He does have a frontline medic, got a Mutavault, has a Johnny, Brave the Elements, all that good stuff in his hand. Going to put the card on the bottom and pass the turn back over to Jacob, who will take a draw step. He's going to play a Hallowed Fountain untapped immediately and pass the turn. It smells like a dissolve to me.
It's pretty loud, pretty loud declaration there. We'll see if Lundquist wants to. Maybe he plays a frontline medic here. Maybe he just plays a Dryad Militant and a Mutavault. We'll see how he wants it. I'd be surprised to see him just run the Ajani into this counterspell.
Yeah,
unless
same.
Maybe he has another copy.
Got Sacred Foundry hanging out there as well. That Mutavault's going to be probably the more important card that gets played. And doesn't play anything. Wow.
Yep. Since that Dryad Militant is his whole turn anyway, I think Lundquist wants to wait until next turn where he can cast 2 spells in 1 turn.
All right.
I like it.
Like, he knows that Jacob has Dissolve based off of Hallowed Fountain coming to play untapped. So it's really interesting to see Ben not play anything in a single turn. But I also think it's smart because he wants to set it up so that he can play 2 spells in 1 turn.
Especially since Wilson gets to scry. I think it's Lundquist is right here and holding off 1 turn.
Yeah.
The cost is so high if that Dissolve just happens and Lundquist has no follow-up in that turn.
All right, now here's a Jace. That's going to tick on up, pass the turn back. I'm excited to watch these two play, actually.
Yeah.
They're both so good at Magic. There's going to be some gamesmanship, I think, just what we saw the last turn.
Yeah. Not a play we would see in the 0-0 bracket very often.
Yeah.
But these two players at 5-0. So Lundquist has an opening now. He can
do whatever he wants.
He can deploy his creatures. That's very risky against Supreme Verdict, but gives him the most action against Jace. He can get his Ajani on the board, but that means it might be a bigger struggle for him to whittle this Jace down. So Lundquist is going to stick his Planeswalker.
Supreme Verdict off the top there for Wilson. So that'll be something that he can put into his bag of tricks. I know that when we were watching Wilson play in the last match against Red White Devotion, he played Elspeth on basically turn 6 both games, makes you wonder how many of those he does have in his deck. He only has 1.
Yeah.
So, I don't think it's going to be terribly likely that we see an Elspeth get dropped on turn 6 yet again, which will make it very difficult for Lundquist to be able to win. But, it's certainly possible.
But it doesn't have to be Elspeth for him to win the game. It's not like he has to find that very fast.
Agreed.
With just Revelations and removal spells, he can fend off Lundquist indefinitely in theory.
Jace moves up. Mutavault's going to be the land that's played. 3 mana, so I think we're going to see Detentions for to take care of the Ajani, so that's what will happen there. Lundquist consults his hand before untapping. So Ben going to take a draw. Daring Skyjack is the draw for the turn.
And by setting this up this way, Wilson's sort of implying that he is willing to trade with the Mutavault. Just an attack at Jace. Jace loses 2 loyalty.
I think obviously this is exactly where this is what Jacob wants to have happening, obviously. Is, you put all your time and effort towards taking care of Jace, lets me get to Elspeth, lets me get to Revelation, just lets me set up.
Yeah.
Which is all I want to do anyway. And at some point you're going to have to commit some real threats here, I think is what he's saying to Ben.
Even if Jace is just 4 mana, gain 8 life or 10 life or something like that.
That's great.
That's still a great deal, and it has the potential to be so much more than that.
Azorius Guild gave the draw. You see Wilson's going to organize his mana, going to cast Supreme Verdict, get the 2 for 1. See how he wants to use Jace here, too. He's just going to tick it up. I like his use of Jace here, too.
Yeah, it just gives him so much of a buffer life total-wise, and Jace's ultimate is also a way for him to win the game, too. So it's not like Lundquist can just ignore it.
Lundquist is going to deploy 2 more threats in Dried Militant and Daring Scgoak after attacking the Mutavault over to the Jace. So Jace is at 4 right now, and basically saying, all right, do you have another Supreme Verdict? Lundquist has drawn a healthy amount of lands this game. 6 a lot for the Boros deck.
Yeah, and he's also scryed a few times as well. So.
Yeah. His last card in his hand is Brave the Elements. Jace is going to go up yet again. And so now Wilson gets to, he's got that Mutavault back on defense, which looks pretty nice right now.
And that means the Militant can attack.
Yeah.
But
the tough part here is Lundquist just serves in, and Wilson isn't willing to trade his Mutavault for the Scgoak, is that Wilson just sitting there with land up, and you know what that represents when you're playing it's a blue-white deck, which is Revelation.
And now Lundquist doesn't even want to cast a spell because he's conscious of that Dissolve from turn 3.
That Dissolve that he was playing around for so long. Now he's going to deploy Precinct Captain. And, this Dissolve is going to get cast eventually. The question is it going to get cast now? And the way that Wilson decides to use this Dissolve is really interesting. Here's a Revelation for 3 because he bluffed it on 3. And so now Ben has to decide, was it a bluff? Well, he had it on 3. But now Ben needs to decide, was it a bluff or was it not a bluff? Am I going to cast my spells or am I not going to cast my spells? And Wilson choosing not to use on the Precinct Captain is pretty telling because I think that's a really good spot to use a Dissolve.
Well, in Wilson's spot, I think that you don't want to use your counter on anything that Jace plus Mutavault can cover.
Sure.
I think if it was another Daring Scgoak, for example, something that warrants an answer, then I think you might have seen Jacob use his counterspell there. But against something that the Mutavault still has covered, I don't think it's worth using.
Okay. Mutavault's going to go active. I think we're going to... Are we going to go sideways at Jace? Yep. Now, Wilson does have 2 Mutavaults down there, so how good of an attack is this for Ben?
I mean, he's willing to sacrifice 2 creatures to get that Jace off the table, which is, in essence, what this attack looks like.
Does that get the Jace off the table, though?
No, it actually only gets it down to 1, right? If he just blocks 2 power guys.
So, yeah, he gets to eat a Mutavault with his own Mutavault. He gets to eat a Precinct Captain. So damage is going to happen. And now he's going to follow up with a Scgoak. And I think I'm kind of with you. He's going to use Essence Scatter. And I like the use of Essence Scatter instead of Dissolve there, just because Dissolve can always just hang around here to counter Brave the Elements or a Boros Charm.
Or a Spirit of Heliod, which would also be good here.
Jace ticks up yet again. He's going to attack it. And now there's Last Breath to take care of this.
It's a combo.
It
Jace plus Last Breath on a 3 power guy.
There is a Brave the Elements. He lets that happen. He says, I'm going to try to block now. Yep. Again, not using that Dissolve, ever, at any point. But I like that. I like that.
And, this is a really good example of what I was talking about, about Mutavault being the most powerful card it hasn't been the most, draw-dropping, exciting thing, but these Mutavaults that Wilson has had have been really important in the way this game's played out.
Yep. Not to mention, take a look at his life total. 21 against a hyper-aggressive deck. And you see Lundquist is just like, I can't get through this Jace. I can't get through anything that you're doing. Like, no, you haven't found your Elspeth to win yet, but I can't ever get through this Jace lock that I'm in. And he just concedes the game, which may feel pretty premature, but, at that point, it would take, a miracle for him to come back and win that game.
Yep. And as we're going to go to the sideboard here, a lot of the slots that Ben has dedicated towards the control matchup, which is primarily Esper, are cards like Burning Earth, because they're all non-basic lands, or very close to all non-basic lands, and Mizzium Mortars to cover Blood Baron. Those tools don't do anything here. The blue-white deck isn't really that susceptible to Burning Earth. It has, 16 basic lands, so you can't really bring it in here, and no Mortars targets. So we're probably going to see Ben go to his 1 Spirit of Heliod, and his 2 copies of Glare of Heresy. But this is another edge that the blue-white deck has, is some people have sideboard cards dedicated for Esper that don't matter against you. Burning Earth and Mizzium Mortars are 2 very good examples.
We'll take a look at Wilson's sideboard and what already looks to be a pretty favorable matchup for him. Now, I know that we talked about last round Fiend Slayer Paladin and how it wasn't very good at controlling Devotion because that deck's not hyper-aggressive, but I think this is a matchup that's actually pretty good.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So he's got 2 copies of that. 3 game saves, obviously not for this matchup. 3 copies of Celestial Flare, which are fine. They're not exciting or anything like that. There are plenty of creatures that Ben can sacrifice, and I think a lot of the time Lundquist will actually have a choice, but it's still a removal spell. So I think that those are perfectly fine. A Ratchet Bomb, which is fantastic against this deck. So many 1-drops, 12 of them in here. An additional Last Breath to go along with the 3 main deck is certainly going to come in. Pithing Needle, a card that we talked about a little bit earlier today, takes care of Ajani, takes care of Mutavault. Got one of those in the sideboard. Wouldn't be surprised to see that come in. Glare of Heresy, obviously just a removal spell in this matchup. And then 2 copies of Negate. I don't think he's going to need Negate here.
No, I think if I was in Jacob's position, I'd be looking to cut the counter spells and just add more cheap removal spells, particularly on the draw. I think that the counter spells are difficult to time and not that efficient against Lundquist's saturation of 1 and 2 mana spells. So I would expect to see more of that spot removal, more of that efficiency added, and for cards like Dissolve and Syncopate and what have you to get moved to the sideboard.
So that'll set the scene for game number 2. Again, Jacob Wilson won game number 1 and won it fairly handily with blue-white control, and what I perceive to be a pretty difficult matchup here for Lundquist. Now, of course, Benny is a really, really great player and great with the Boros deck, but you know, the way the cards lined up and when you got players on similar skill level, you know, it's all about matchup then.
Yeah, and you know, there was a lot of gamesmanship going on there too. I think Wilson immediately putting his Hallowed Fountain into play, untapped and saying go. How Lundquist then took his turn. It's possible, you know, maybe Wilson is, even if he did have Dissolve in his hand, but even if he doesn't, there's some argument to make that play there if you have nothing and all you're trying to do is stick Jace on the most stable board possible. So there's a lot of room for both players to finagle and navigate and try to trick one another.
Yeah.
But the blue-white deck, you know, that game was, you know, it played a lot of the same cards as Esper does, and, you know, Supreme Verdict and Jace were heavily featured. But the difference between Blue-White and Esper was really on display in that match. Both the number of lands that Jacob came to play, that he just had to play that were untapped, and Mutavault both played critical roles in that game. And those are tools
huge.
Tools that Esper does not have.
No 1-drop for Benny. And Zorius Guildgate here for Wilson to start the show. He's going to play Precinct Captain on 2 and pass the turn back. Be surprised if this does connect between Azorius Charm and Last Breath in the deck.
Oh, we might have an opening here. Raid the Elements still could be a thing.
And for 2, all right, so it does connect, does Precinct Captain.
We have jokingly started referring to Precinct Captain as Battle of Wits.
Okay.
If you get to untap with it and play, you win the game. We'll see if that holds true here.
Here's a frontline medic, so Ben really moving in now. Essence Scatter going to take care of that. Mutavault important, that's the land that he played though.
Really powerful tool.
You see a Verdict there from Wilson. I think that was his draw stop. He's got an island that he slid forward. Don't know if he has a white mana or not. He's going to play this. He's going to play D-Sphere, take care of the old Precinct Captain, pass the turn back. Lundquist draws a card. It's a frontline medic. He's got an Ajani in the grip as well. He has another Mutavault too, so we talk about Mutavault on Wilson's side. Mutavault could be the card that really gets Ben this game.
Yep. So many free damage and so much contorting of your opponent's play for the opportunity cost of playing a colorless land.
And Ben's got some decisions to make this turn. He's going to go with Temple of Triumph. He's going to take a look at the scry here. He's got a frontline medic, a Soldier of the Pantheon, and an Ajani Call of the Pride in his hand. How does he want to go about deploying his threats this game? He wants to get the Planeswalker online, pump up the Soldier, and start getting in damage this way.
Yeah, this play is both good against Supreme Verdict and against Jace, so I like forwarding the board this way.
Wilson draws an island for the turn. You see him move a Hallowed Fountain to his hand, to the front of his hand. He's got 2 Hallowed Fountains. Looks like he's going to put one of them into play tapped and just pass the turn back. So the pacing of this game, I think, right now leans Ben's way because he's doing a really nice job of playing around Wrath of God. And another Mutavault off the top is beautiful.
Yeah. Now, Jacob does have Elspeth in his hand, so he can actually still win this game even with how bad this is going by just ramping into Elspeth.
We see an activation of Ajani. Going to pump up that Soldier token into a 3/3.
Lundquist waited to see if there was going to be a response there, as he was curious, playing around potentially Last Breath.
So an attack here for 5. Take the damage. I think I like deploying Frontline Medic this turn. I like this because it forces the Wrath. Now, the consequence of this is, like, you're not having a frontline medic for later for a Sphinx's Revelation, but this forces Wilson's hand now of actually casting Wrath, and now you can load up your Mutavaults with the Ajani tokens and still deploy threats and get in for 4 and do all that jazz.
Yeah, and Lundquist is getting to the point where he's dealing so much damage that even if Wilson has Elspeth, that giving flying and double strike to a Mutavault is a way to get out of this.
So Wilson's going to play the Verdict. He's going to play Hallowed Fountain tapped and pass the turn back. Ben's going to quickly untap, draws a Boros Leaf for the turn. A card that's really not of much consequence at this point. He's going to play a Mutavault. He's going to activate it. He's going to pump up the jam on one of those Mutavaults. Be surprised if he doesn't activate the other one. I think I just want to get in for as much damage as I can. Yep. He's going to play his threats, attack you for 3, 4, 5, push you to 6. And so now, as you mentioned, if it's a tap out of Elspeth for the turn, it's no good because then you just activate Mutavault, jump it, and that's 6 exactly to get it over with. So this is one of the things that I really, really like about white aggro decks is just the pacing that you can put into play of the game. Because, again, we saw Wilson have an Essence Scatter, a Detention Sphere, a Supreme Verdict. His draw is good.
Oh, yeah.
But the way that Ben was able to pace this game, here's a Revelation for 2, so Wilson's going to go up to 8, Ben going to gain a life off the Soldier of the Pantheon, is really, really nice. And I think one of the things that Wilson was looking for was his Pithing Needle.
Yep.
That's why he did that for 2, is because he obviously is bored in Pithing Needle. And, when we, a little bit earlier, saw Ben play against Esper that had access to Pithing Needle, I didn't even bring it up. But now, when you kind of look back at it, as you mentioned, the fact that it's so good against Ajani and so good against Mutavault, the 2 cards that won Ben that game, you see exactly why Needle's a great sideboard option against this Boros deck from a blue-white base control deck.
Yeah, it's, I brought up this comment when we watched the Esper match earlier today, and I think the same thing is true about blue-white. When white aggro, Boros, what have you, beats these blue control decks, it's very rarely because the blue control deck ran out of cards.
Yep.
It's not, we were trading 1 for 1 for a while, and the Boros deck just had 1 threat too many. That's very rarely how the game goes because you have cards like Jace and Elspeth and Blood Baron that just shut the door. When the blue control deck loses, it's often with cards in hand, and often because it just wasn't efficient enough to what's going on. So even if Pithing Needle isn't the most efficient thing at all times, the fact that it's 1 mana and covers you against some of the best cards in the deck means it's a very valuable tool to have access to, because the games for the blue control deck are all about efficiency. Sometimes Pithing Needle's called a mulligan because they still did something with their Ajani, or their Mutavault's still making mana or whatever. Forget that. It's just be as efficient as possible, and your Sphinx's Revelations and Jace's and Elspeth's and Blood Barons, that'll take care of the rest.
Yeah.
You just need to make sure that you're getting to the board quickly enough. We saw Jacob that game go, turn 1, do nothing, turn 2, do nothing. That was basically game over.
Yep.
I mean, he had a counterspell, but he didn't answer what Lundquist did on turn 2, and that was the cascading consequences of all the mana he had to spend, having to use his reactive cards in maybe not the best order or not at the moment he wanted to. That all added up into Lundquist just running away with the game.
And the thing that I find super interesting about that game is think about the last turn of the game where Wilson revelates for 2. He goes from 6 to 8, and if he finds the Needle, plays Needle, names Mutavault, he's sitting at 8 life, he's facing down an Ajani that's on 7, and 2 creatures. He's a Boros and a Soldier. Now, he's not going to die that turn unless Ben draws a Boros Charm. So now he's going to take whatever amount of damage he takes, and we don't know the contents of Wilson's hand at that point, but what if it's a Wrath now? Now Ajani, is out there, and I think he can beat Ajani from that point. Is Ben going to ultimate the Ajani? I don't know. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. I don't think he's entirely sure either. But the fact that if he would have Revelationed into a Needle there, shuts off those Mutavaults, isn't facing lethal unless
game's still
Ben
going.
outdecks. We still got a game.
Yep. And again, all of this is turned on by the fact that Wilson has so many untapped lands in his deck in the first place. If he's all on Ravnica Duels and Temples, that out isn't even a thing.
Yeah. So either way, we see both players shuffling up for game number 3 here between Ben Lundquist and Jacob Wilson, 2 Open Series champions.
Recent.
Yes,
recent.
Very, very recent. Seattle Legacy Open for Jacob Wilson, Rug Delver. I'm sure we'll have him on camera at multiple points tomorrow. Ben Lundquist, plenty of top 8s, also a win in Los Angeles with a variation of this Boros aggro deck. Just a couple of weeks ago, it feels like now.
Yeah. And a recent Grand Prix top 8 in this very city a few months ago.
Yeah, that's true.
M13 Limited.
This convention center was where it was at.
Also, this blue-white deck goes without saying, it will really improve with the Scryland.
Yeah, boy. That's scary, actually. Zori Scgoak going to start the show here for Wilson. We'll see if Lundquist does have a 1-drop. Of course, he wants to get off to a pretty nice start. You see him move a Temple forward in his hand as well. He's going to start off with Soldier of the Pantheon, which, again, that's a card that's insane against Esper. So hard for them to deal with, but not great against blue-white because of Last Breath.
Yep. And that Last Breath could have been Precinct Captain or Yoked Ox or a number of other tools that the blue-white deck has access to.
Boros Charm the draw there for Lundquist. You see Temple's going to put the top card on the bottom, Ben passes the turn back. So he's off to a slow start here, which is not where you want to be against blue-white control. You want to be pressuring them and pacing the game. You see Wilson already has a Jace in his hand.
And a Pithy Needle as well.
Yep. 2 copies of a Johnny in Lundquist's hand right now. Pithy Needle could be great this game. Wilson just plays an island, passes the turn back, representing Dissolve potentially. Representing a bevy of things, honestly. There's a Scgoak. Lundquist just has to pass the turn back. Not a great start for Ben. Because now he's in that 4-mana flashpoint where Jace or Supreme Verdict are just going to start becoming live cards. Assuming Wilson has a 4th land, which he does have in the Plains.
Well, the 4th, the Boros charms in Lundquist's hand give him a lot of action against Jace.
Yeah, they're not bad. And thankfully for him, he's going to be able to kill this Jace because we saw what Jace did game 1.
Yeah.
Which was a pain.
He's going to be able to take this out really easily, or he can play a Johnny this turn and simply plus knocked Jace down to 2 loyalty and have Boros Charm next turn to finish it off. So,
yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like if he does, and the Mutavault was a huge draw too, as we saw in the last game. But it's kind of interesting how he wants to craft this turn because I think a Johnny +1, then the get in for 3, put it down to 2 is pretty interesting play. But also the play of just attack it and Boros Charm and don't let you do anything with it is interesting too.
Yeah, I think I like this. It's even if something happens to the Ajani or the Scgoak next turn, he can still answer Jace with the Boros Charm in hand, and it's really important for Lundquist to add to his board.
Yeah.
This puts some pressure on Jacob and threatens Jace, and also advances Lundquist's board in the event that something happens, as opposed to Boros Charm, which is just saying, all right, this is my turn now, this is your turn.
Cashing in Jace, we got lands and a Last Breath there. It's Zori's Guildgate and a Hallowed Fountain. And don't forget, Wilson has not played land yet this turn. Good use of Jace, obviously.
So Lundquist splits this land spells.
All right, I'm going to take the 1 removal spell. Lands go on the bottom there for Wilson, so he's making a loud declaration that I already have lands. I don't need those, but I will take a removal spell. So 1 mana, and here is the Needle. The Johnnies are down. Interesting choice here, too, because he has the 2 options that are in play. He's got a Johnny and Mutavault, the 2 cards that beat Wilson in game 2, but he does decide to take care of the Planeswalker.
Well, that Last Breath makes the Mutavault a lot less threatening.
That's true. Azorius Arrestor off the top here for Ben. A little surprised to see that after sideboard. Might just need it for curve purposes.
He just might need to cut the Brave the Elements.
Sure.
He has very little sideboard in, as we talked about. He's got 2 glares and the spear, not very much.
Scgoak comes across for 4. Don't forget, Scgoak is sitting at a 4-2, so Last Breath can't actually kill that right now. So let's see how Ben wants to keep working this, because Frontline Medic is pretty nice here in the fact that that also can't be Last Breath, but that means, how am I doing around Supreme Verdict? Because you can tell that Ben probably wants to leave. Ben wants to play the game in such a way that he can have mana up to beat a Verdict with a Boros Charm.
Yes.
Or get the opponent within range that those 2 Boros Charms are actually just going to be a big hit. So he's going to go a Precinct Captain.
Wilson untaps and draws.
Yeah, it's a pretty easy Verdict here. Verdict with 2 mana available too for Last Breath and Essence Scatter. Boy, it's a really good turn. Mutavault off the top.
Really good. That's a really good draw here.
Yeah, there's a Medic.
As Lundquist needs both lands and spells, and Mutavault is both of those things.
It's kind of funny, too, because you know Ben very well, as do I, and most of the people watching at home have seen Ben play a lot. He's the kind of guy who likes to play a Sphinx's Revelation type strategy. So I know you've been in this point before where you're Ben, where you're just hoping that one of the cards in Wilson's hand is not Sphinx's Revelation.
Correct.
That's where he's at right now.
If he's trading 1 for 1, Lundquist has a lot of time, and he's got 2 Boros Charms in his hand. He doesn't need to connect that many more times. If Revelations is in Wilson's hand, then the game becomes very challenging.
There's a Jace. It up, and it pass it back. Lundquist takes a draw step. It's a Plains. Plains is actually pretty important here.
And this is a rough spot because activating both Mutavaults is Lundquist's entire turn. Only activating one plays right into the Last Breath he knows is there. So
I think the thing here with the Last Breath is I think you just have to get past this point of, Last Breath is going to do something this game, regardless. So you might as well just let it do something and then move on. Deciding what that something is obviously much more difficult.
Well, you could just cast Azorius Arrestor and pass the turn, in theory. And then go, end of turn, I'll Boros Charm, redirect to you, and then attack in 1 shot. But It's all very awkward.
Yeah. Plays that. And he's just going to pass back. Okay, this is what you thought he might do.
Yeah.
Again, don't forget, Wilson only has he only has 2 cards in his hand. I think it's Last Breath and Supreme Verdict. He draws a card for the turn. He didn't quite make out what that was. Detention Sphere. So he's got 3 removal spells.
Yeah. But they aren't the best against Mutavault.
No, they're not. I think he might. I thought he might fire off a Charm at Jace. Feels like you're walking on ice shells, hoping your opponent doesn't have Rev.
Yeah,
the entire
always.
time. All right, Mutavault. So he's moving in finally. Now, where are we going with this is the question. I think this is mighty interesting to see where he's going to go with these. He's going all Jacob.
Just all Jacob.
Yeah. How do you feel about that? Just try to ignore Jace.
It requires so many of Lundquist's resources to kill this Jace that it might just be best to ignore it.
And we saw that in game 1 where he spent so much time trying to kill Jace and then he just lost.
Yeah.
And he actually just conceded because he could just never get it off the board. So Last Breath is going to resolve here. It's going to take down Mutavault. So this is an attack for 2, which is obviously quite unexciting. But Jacob's going to go down to 14. And Ben does have 8 damage in his hand as Wilson does draw a card. You see D-Sphere. I wonder if he's going to cash that in right now.
He's going to cast something. All these points matter. Lundquist's attack last turn is a very loud declaration that I'm trying to burn you out of this game. So,
I also think what's kind of interesting too is I think Lundquist's attack like that was basically saying, "Hey, I want you to minus your Jason, try to find an answer, and then I can kill it with Boros Charm." And so he's going to go upstairs with Boros Charm now. So Wilson's going to go down to 10. Lundquist is going to untap and take a draw. He's going to fire at Mutavault, attack you for 1. That's a pretty devastating Azorius Charm. Wow.
And now Lundquist with basically no action, a redundant Ajani, a Boros Charm with Jacob not in range and a land. So now Jacob can start looking for action.
Yeah, he can safely move that down. There's a Celestial Flare and a Mutavault. So now that Mutavault that's put back on top, that's covered.
Yep.
In more ways than one. So Ben's attempts to whittle down Wilson's life total, they're not going to work great anymore.
Yeah, that Azorius Charm was a backbreaker.
Pretty good Magic card.
Lundquist was in trouble before, and now the door is quickly shutting. Jace is really good against attacking decks. It's really good against decks that are trying to attack.
Yeah, that's not so bad. Wilson really giving this some thought on what to do with this Jace split. Celestial Fair and Island versus Mutavault. Again, this could be a little bit of gamesmanship as well. Just really giving this a long think through before deciding. He's going to take the 2 cards, going to play the Island, put the Mutavault on the bottom of his deck and pass a turn back. Part of the reason that he might want that Mutavault is because it does represent a clock. However, Lundquist is at 28.
Yeah, he's not. The issue is not going to be. I mean, if Lundquist, when Jacob wins this game, it's going to be kind of arbitrarily. As you see, Mutavault, Divination, and Elixir. Yeah. Elixir is also just so powerful here.
And I'm sure what Jacob's doing now, because I believe he drew a Syncopate for the turn. Yeah, he did. He's going to take the Elixir, but what he's doing now is I think he's aggressively trying to find a Revelation and get this game out of range. He's going to play a land. He's going to play the Elixir, so now he's at a virtual 15. So the Boros Charm plan is basically gone. And I think Ben wants to fire off a Boros Charm to target that Jace, but he can't. So now he's going to do this right now. I actually like that. Is there a reason to do it right now?
During the upkeep?
Yeah.
You're almost positive that Lundquist doesn't have Skullcrack or something like that in his hand.
Okay.
Which is, I guess, a card he could have boarded in. It's not out of the question.
Ben needs a land right now, so he would be able to Boros Charm that Jace off the table. Because of the Syncopate for 4. Not sure if he's playing around that or not. There that is in Boros Elite. He needs one more creature to have fun with, however, as Wilson's going to take a draw step. And Ben already knows about the Celestial Flare, so it's not going to do a ton. And Jay's sitting at 3, up or down? Up or down with that Planeswalker?
I think I like going down here. But this is
go
also
up.
fine.
He's going to go up and play pretty conservative with it. He's going to fire at Mutavault, come into the red zone, see where this is going to go. I feel like Ben is almost at the mercy of hoping that Wilson just bricks a bunch.
Yes.
That's basically what it feels like to me. Like, he does have that one Boros Charm, and that Boros Charm he's hanging on to. As here's a Precinct Captain. Pass the turn back after playing a couple guys. I think Wilson does still have a Supreme Verdict, yeah. And I think Ben's probably going to cash in this Boros Charm. Hope it's good, but we know there's a Syncopate for 1 coming. Yep. So the creatures are going to go to the bin, leaving him with just a Mutavault. And Wilson still has that Jace and the Celestial Flare. Plays an Azori Skillgate and passes the turn back. Sacred Foundry off the top here for Lundquist. And you see a deep sigh.
Yep.
I think Ben knows that he's beat. He's still going to play, obviously, and Celestial Flare can't take care of that right now because of the mana that Wilson has left available. Jace is going to turn over a D-Sphere, a Last Breath, and an Azorius Guildgate. And if you're ever wondering how good of a card Jace Architect of Thought is, I think you've seen it in Games 1 and Games 3.
Yeah. Saved about 20 points of damage and drew 8 cards this game, I think. Something along those lines.
It's no Jace the Mind Sculptor, but what is? Boros lead off the top here. And the other big one, too, is Pithing Needle.
Yes.
You see the kind of impact this card's having because, again, if it would have named Mutavault, it would have been very good this game. You know, unfortunately for Lundquist, Mutavault is just being taken care of by Celestial Flares and Jaces and Last Breaths and all of those things. And the card that's a really big deal is a Johnny, and that's being taken care of. Elspeth is going to get snapped up pretty quick there by Jacob because he finally found a way to win the game, and that is going to do it. So Jacob Wilson does defeat Benjamin Lundquist 2-1. Blue-white control defeating the red-white Boros aggro deck. And Wilson, again, he's won a Legacy Open recently, and he's well on his way in the Standard Open.
It's funny you say, you know, Jace Architect of Thought is no Jace the Mind Sculptor, and I totally agree. But if it was Jace the Mind Sculptor, I think Lundquist would have had no difficulty winning that game. Mutavault would have been insane against it.
Yeah.
He would have also been able to kill it, you know, the turn it got played unless Jacob just fade sealed. I mean, against decks that are playing with 2 or 3 mana creatures,